The film tells a beautiful love story that inspired a nation. And it didn't just inspire a nation to be on side when it comes to this couple, but it inspired a nation that eventually gained its independence because of their leader, Seretse Khama, and that's hugely important. You know, it was interesting when I first came across the project, which was through David Oyelowo, because I hadn't heard of it before. I hadn't heard of Seretse Khama, I hadn't heard of Ruth Williams before. And for me, one of the things that hit me, apart from the fact that it is obviously a great love story, was the fact that it was a story of African independence, but also the might of the unity when it came to the couple. You know, the fact that this could have been an ordinary love story where you just show how two people get together. But actually what you saw is what happens once they get together and the might of an empire is against them, and how they prove that their might was stronger. You know, on the one hand, the couple were probably so love-struck that they didn't really understand the consequences of what they were doing. You know, the idea that an African man of influence, a king of a nation, you know, part of Botswana, was going to take home his queen from England, not just an outsider to his country, but a white queen, in a world where really what most people from Botswana, or Bechuanaland, as it was called at that time, understood of white people was that they were colonialists. So the idea that he was going to bring one home, you know, to be their queen, obviously was one major obstacle. I think it isn't just that stories like this have been airbrushed from history, but I think that they have often been told from a completely different perspective. And so what happens is when they're told from a perspective where oftentimes the people who are possibly really the heroes of the story or really the centre of the stories don't get a chance to see those stories told through their gaze, you get a different kind of history. And I think that's the one thing. I think the other reason why you should make any period drama full stop, I think, is that oftentimes they show us how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go. And I think they offer us a measure, they offer us a benchmark for which we can measure not only who we are today, who we were yesterday, but who we might want to become in the future. I think that's really important. The fact that we can now add Seretse Khama alongside Nelson Mandela is a really great thing, I think. He represents strength, he represents principles, he represents leadership. You know, one of the questions I really wanted to pose with this film is, what does it mean to be a leader? What is a leader? Is a leader a ruler? Or is a leader somebody who's in service to their people? And for me, Seretse was in service to his people, and the fact that he fell in love with an outsider didn't necessarily mean that he should abandon his people or that he should have lost any care or love or bond that he had with these people. And I think the fact that he married an outsider made him possibly go even further to prove his connection with his own people as well. Whenever I'm concentrating on these stories that have a sort of big world story attached to them, I really try and focus on the detail of the individual, on the intimate story of the individual, whilst obviously also inevitably telling the bigger story that they have an impact on. So I was conscious that I was contributing to his legacy, but what I really wanted to do was just doing justice as a human being, as someone who existed, someone who loved, someone who became a father, and yes, ultimately someone who became a leader. But it was concentrating on the detail of the man. Otherwise, I think it can become a bit daunting, a bit overwhelming when you realise you're telling somebody this important story. I've known David for the best part of 2 decades, or almost 20 years, and The fact that we are both of African parents, we were both raised in the UK, this story means so much to both of us. It means that I have to say that for me, it's his most powerful performance. For me, he plays a man who's very recognisable. I didn't grow up with African leaders around me, but I grew up with African men of dignity around me and of intellect, and of the type that we're often starved of seeing on screen. So in seeing David play this role, it speaks very much to my heart. And of course, when I see him, I recognise him, and if I recognise him, it means he's giving a great performance. He's real. This was a really, really important story for him. It was a really important part for him to play. And he was able to hand all of that over to me and say, give us your vision. For me, I've always loved Rosamund Pike's quiet dignity. She's a quiet dignity and a real presence on screen. She's luminous, and she, you know, we sent her the script. David had worked with her before on a previous film. We sent her the script. We didn't know how she would react, but once she did react, I knew she would be right. She had a visceral response to the script. You know, a connection that I hadn't quite expected. It was powerful. It kind of hit you the moment you spoke to her about it. So that was the first thing, is that we wanted to give it to an actress who would value the story and who would be as tenacious and passionate about telling the story as we were, and that was there from the get-go with Rosamund. You have to believe in their love. You have to believe that everything that they're fighting for is worth it, and that this love is worth it. And you can't account for a dynamic. You don't know whether a couple that you cast together are going to have a dynamic. And you know, you can do chemistry reads and all of that kind of thing, but you don't really know until the day, and finally until the film is finished. Once we got the couple on set, you know, actually sometimes I had to stop them giggling a bit too much, because they laughed together, they had fun together, and they clearly understood their characters, and they clearly understood the nature of their relationship and what it would take for a relationship like that to withstand everything that Ruth and Seretse's relationship withstood. Canning played beautifully by Jack Davenport, and you notice how his name sounds very similar to Cunning. But Canning was a combination of many characters that existed at the time and that had a role similar to that at the time. And you know, we wanted that character to show that where we were period-wise in terms of the empire, the fact that we were moving towards a transition, and I love stories that figure around transition. And so the empire is shortly about to crumble. India has just gained its independence, and that knowledge is really giving hope to leaders around Africa. And so Jack approached it with the knowledge that he was probably always going to lose at the end, but he was going to hang on to his role, the idea of what the empire represented, for as long as he could. And I think Jack, whilst he gives us a lot of joy watching him in some ways, watching him have to cringe towards the end, but also watching him gain power only to lose it. What he gives us as well as that is also this sense that the real characters that existed in this world did so for a reason. The second moment was when the president himself visited, and I sort of knew all day that he was possibly going to be visiting and that he'd be arriving in his helicopter. And then halfway through a pretty big scene that we were shooting in the village, recreating the village that Seretse was was born in, I heard the sound of a chopper overhead, and I hadn't finished my scene yet. And I thought, you know, I hope it takes you a little while to land, because I've got to finish this scene, because I know once you land, everybody's going to go completely crazy. and want to say hello to their president, and so would my crew. So luckily, he landed in a timely fashion. He visited and saw David dressed as his father, and then later Ruth dressed as his mother. And I sort of remembering him mumbling under his breath to me, you know, it's really strange when you see your parents come back to life. And it was sort of in that moment that it really hit me that there was this man, and he was a testament to Ruth and Seretse's very real legacy. He was a testament to their real existence, but he was also a testament to all of the things that I've been talking about, their tenacity and their belief in their principles and that will to hold out and not give in against an empire, you know, against 3 governments, and against a long period of time where they were forced to be apart.